In the vast expanse of space, the forgotten battlefield lay silent, its surface marred with craters and debris from a war long past. It was here, amidst twisted metal and broken armor, that Commander Leon Carter stumbled upon something extraordinary. The human mercenary, clad in his weathered combat suit, moved cautiously through the field, his boots crunching against the brittle remains of once great machines. His mission had been simple: recover any valuable technology from the ruins. But what he found was far beyond his expectations. Leon's scanner flickered with faint energy readings, guiding him toward a jagged pile of wreckage. As he dug through the charred fragments, his gloved hand brushed against something smooth and unyielding. Carefully, he unearthed it. A blade unlike any he had ever seen. Its surface shimmered faintly in the dim light, shifting hues that seemed to dance between silver and gold. Strange markings ran along its length, alien symbols that glowed softly as if alive. The air around it felt heavier, as though the weapon carried an ancient power that had been dormant for ages. He paused, his breath caught in his chest. The stories he had heard about Zerian relics whispered through his mind. The blade, if it was what he thought, once belonged to Queen Saraia herself, the feared ruler of the Zerian Empire. Legend spoke of its enchantments, its ability to cut through even the strongest of metals, and its bond to the Queen's bloodline. For centuries, it had been lost, and now it rested in his hands. Leon lifted the blade carefully, half expecting it to resist him or trigger some ancient defense. Yet, to his surprise, it moved freely, its weight perfectly balanced in his grip. The symbols on the blade pulsed faintly, as if acknowledging his presence. He frowned, puzzled. How could a human like him hold such a legendary weapon? The Zerians had always claimed their relics were bound to their kind, that no outsider could even lift them, let alone wield them. And yet, here he was, the blade resting firmly in his grasp. As he examined the weapon, a faint hum echoed in the distance. Leon's instincts flared. He had spent years on the battlefield, and that sound, low, resonant, and growing louder, was no natural phenomenon. Quickly, he secured the blade on his back and activated his suit's scanners. The readings were erratic, but one thing was certain. Something was coming, and it was coming fast. He glanced toward the sky and saw a shape descending through the atmosphere. A Zerian dropship, its sleek design unmistakable. They must have detected the blade's energy signature the moment he disturbed it. Leon's mind raced. The Zerians were known for their relentless pursuit of their lost relics. If they found him with the Queen's blade, they would not hesitate to kill him and take it back. Leon broke into a run, his boots pounding against the scorched ground. He zigzagged through the battlefield's remains, using the broken hulls of long-destroyed warships as cover. Behind him, the dropship's engines roared, growing louder as it closed the distance. His heart pounded in his chest. He had faced countless dangers before, raiders, mercenaries, even bounty hunters, but the Zerians were different. Their technology was more advanced, their soldiers trained from birth. This was not a fight he could win. His only hope was to escape, to find a safe place to hide the blade, and figure out why it had chosen him. The ground trembled as the dropship landed nearby. Leon dove into a crater, pressing himself against its edge as he scanned his surroundings. Zerian soldiers, their armor gleaming and their weapons drawn, emerged from the ship. They moved with precision, their eyes scanning the terrain. One of them, clearly a commander, raised a device that emitted a pulse of light. The hum in the air intensified. They were tracking the blade's unique signature. It was only a matter of time before they found him. Leon gritted his teeth, gripping his sidearm. His odds were slim, but he had faced worse. He wasn't about to let them take the blade without a fight. This weapon, whatever it truly was, had come to him for a reason. He didn't understand it yet, but he knew one thing. He had to protect it, no matter the cost. As the soldiers closed in, Leon readied himself. This was only the beginning. As the Zerian soldiers fanned out across the battlefield, Commander Leon Carter stayed low in the crater, his mind racing. He gripped the alien blade strapped to his back, the faint glow from its strange symbols barely visible in the dim light. He didn't know why the weapon allowed him to hold it. He only knew he couldn't let it fall into their hands. The lead Zerian, a tall figure in polished dark armor, barked orders in a language Leon didn't understand. The soldiers formed a search pattern, their scanning devices sweeping back and forth over the shattered landscape. Their movements were methodical, confident, as if they believed no mere human could possibly outmaneuver them. Leon knew better than to underestimate them. Zerians weren't just skilled warriors, they were relentless. The fact that they'd shown up so quickly meant they had been monitoring the blade's location. The moment he disturbed it, they must have locked onto its energy signature. He checked his suit's HUD for any nearby exit points. A small cave system was noted to the west, but it was over 100 meters away, wide open terrain between him and cover. He had no choice but to make his move. Staying put would get him caught, and fighting them head-on was suicide. Leon steadied his breathing, his fingers brushing the hilt of the alien blade. For a moment, he wondered if the weapon might help him if it came to a fight, but he quickly pushed the thought aside. He didn't understand it, and using a tool he couldn't control was too risky. Instead, he relied on his own training. He pulled a small diversion device from his belt, setting it to emit a series of decoy energy signals. He threw it toward a collapsed section of debris, a few dozen meters away. A sharp chirp echoed through the air as it activated, drawing the Zerian's attention. "Spread out. Move." The lead soldier barked in heavily accented Common, confirming Leon's suspicions that they were hunting him specifically. As the soldiers shifted their focus to the decoy, Leon slipped out of the crater, crouched low, and moved as quickly and quietly as possible toward the cave entrance. He kept his steps light, pausing each time he heard a soldier's footsteps or the faint hum of their scanning equipment. His heart pounded in his chest, but his training kicked in, helping him stay calm. With each step, the dark outline of the cave grew larger, its jagged opening a potential escape. Just as he was about to reach the cave, the decoy's signal gave out. The Zerians quickly adjusted, their scanners redirecting toward him once more. Leon broke into a sprint, his muscles screaming in protest as he dashed the final few meters and slid into the cave's shadowy entrance. He pressed himself against the cool rock wall, listening as the soldiers approached. "Commander, the signal is inside the cave," one of the soldiers reported. Leon cursed under his breath. The cave wasn't as deep as he had hoped, and he could already see it was a dead end. He turned, his back to the stone wall, and readied his sidearm. If they came in, he'd have no choice but to fight. His mind raced for alternatives. Could he use the blade? Could it actually help him escape? Before he could decide, the lead Zerian stepped into the cave. The alien's eyes locked onto Leon, and he let out a sharp laugh. "So, the thief has nowhere left to run." "I didn't steal it," Leon replied, keeping his weapon trained on the soldier. "I found it. If anything, it came to me." The Zerian tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "Lies. That blade belongs to Queen Saraia's bloodline. No human can wield it." "Then why can I hold it?" Leon asked, his voice steady despite the tension. The Zerian's confident demeanor faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "Give it to me," he demanded. "Now." Leon didn't move. "I think I'll hold on to it." The soldier stepped closer, raising his weapon. "You're surrounded. Human. Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you live." Leon's grip tightened on the blade's hilt. He felt a faint warmth pulsing from it, almost as if it was responding to the threat. He had no idea what would happen if he drew it, but he was out of options. With a steady hand, he pulled the blade from his back. The glow of its markings intensified, illuminating the cave in a golden light. The Zerian took a step back, his confidence replaced by surprise and fear. The blade, once thought bound only to the Queen's bloodline, now shone brightly in the hands of a human. Leon stood firm, the blade's power humming in his grasp. "Looks like it chose me after all," he said, his voice steady. The Zerithians outside the cave hesitated, their movements uncertain. For the first time, they saw what they had been sent to retrieve, and realized they were not dealing with an ordinary human. As Leon stood there, the glowing blade casting a golden light over the cave's jagged walls, the Zerithian soldier hesitated. In that pause, Leon realized something. This wasn't just about the blade. The way the soldier looked at him, as if seeing a ghost, told Leon there was more to this ancient weapon than the stories led on. "You don't know what you're holding," the Zerithian said finally, his voice carrying a hint of uncertainty. "It's not just a blade. It's a symbol, a bond. It's the Queen's connection to her power." "Yeah," Leon replied, tightening his grip. "If that's true, then why isn't it killing me? Why am I still standing here?" The Zerithian shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the cave entrance where the other soldiers waited. "We don't know why it's responding to you, but it doesn't matter. That blade belongs to Queen Saraia. Hand it over." Leon shook his head. "No chance. If it's this important, I'm keeping it out of her hands. She can't have this kind of power back." "You don't understand what you're doing," the soldier snapped, stepping closer. "This isn't just some trophy. That blade, it could tip the balance of power in the galaxy." "Sounds like a great reason not to give it to her," Leon said dryly. He wasn't sure if he was bluffing or if he genuinely believed it. Either way, he couldn't let them take it. The blade had stayed lost for a reason, and if it had found him, maybe there was a purpose behind that. He just didn't know what it was yet. The Zerithian raised his weapon, but Leon didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to show weakness now. The blade felt alive in his hand, almost like it was waiting for him to act. But he held off. He didn't want to rely on something he didn't understand, not unless it was absolutely necessary. "You're outnumbered," the soldier said. "You can't fight us all." "Maybe not," Leon admitted. "But I don't have to fight all of you." He gestured toward the other soldiers with his free hand. "Look at them. They're hesitating. Why is that?" The soldier glanced back, and for a moment, Leon saw doubt in his posture. The others were holding their position at the cave's entrance, their weapons lowered, their faces, what little Leon could see of them, betraying uncertainty. "It's because of this, isn't it?" Leon continued, raising the blade slightly. "They've never seen it glow like this before. They don't know what it means. Maybe they're wondering if I'm supposed to have it. Maybe they're thinking the Queen was wrong." The soldier snarled, his confidence slipping. "Shut up. They follow the Queen's orders, and so do I. We'll take it back, no matter what." "Go ahead and try," Leon said, his voice calm. "But you better hope the blade doesn't have a say in the matter." The glow pulsed faintly, almost as if the blade was reacting to the tension. Leon didn't know if it was all in his head or if the weapon truly had some kind of will. Either way, it gave him the sliver of an edge he needed. The Zerithians were formidable, but right now, they were cautious. The unknown scared them more than he did. Before the soldier could make a move, a voice came through his communicator. "Stand down. Do not engage." It was a woman's voice, stern and commanding. The soldier froze, his weapon half raised. "My queen," he said into his comm, bowing his head slightly. "We've located the blade. It's in the human's possession." The voice replied, sharp and direct. "I said stand down. Return to the ship and bring the human with the blade. No harm must come to him." Leon's eyes narrowed. That didn't sound like the reaction of someone angry or desperate to reclaim their weapon. It sounded calculated, like she knew something he didn't. The soldier lowered his weapon fully, frustration etched across his face. He turned to Leon and said, "You're coming with us. The Queen wishes to speak to you herself." Leon's mind raced. The last thing he wanted was to walk into the lion's den. But if the Queen was calling off her soldiers, It meant she thought she had a better chance at getting the blade back another way. Maybe he could use that to his advantage. "Fine," Leon said, his tone cool. "I'll hear what she has to say. But the blade stays with me." The soldier scowled but gave a short nod. "For now." As they made their way back toward the dropship, the blade's glow dimmed slightly, its energy settling. Leon didn't know what awaited him aboard the Zerithian vessel, but one thing was clear. This was only the beginning of something much larger than a simple relic retrieval, and he intended to figure out the truth on his terms. The journey back to the Zerithian dropship was tense. Leon kept the glowing blade securely in his grasp, his eyes scanning the terrain for any sign of an ambush. But the Zerithian soldiers didn't attempt anything. They marched in silence, occasionally glancing at him, their expressions a mix of resentment and curiosity. As the group approached the sleek black dropship, Leon noticed the faint hum of its engines. The ship was smaller than most Zerithian warcraft, built for speed rather than heavy combat. Its polished exterior reflected the faint light of the distant stars, giving it an almost predatory look. The main hatch opened with a soft hiss, and the soldiers gestured for Leon to step inside. Leon hesitated. He didn't trust them, but he also knew that refusing would only make things worse. Clutching the blade tightly, he climbed aboard. The interior was just as sleek as the outside. Smooth metal walls, dim lighting, and seats arranged in precise rows. The air inside was cool and faintly metallic. The Zerithians took their positions, and one of them gestured for Leon to sit in the center seat. He lowered himself carefully, the blade resting across his lap. He could feel the faint warmth of its energy, a steady reminder that it was still very much active. The lead soldier spoke into his communicator. "The human is aboard. We're returning to the flagship." A short, curt response came through. "Understood. Proceed." As the dropship lifted off the ground, Leon felt a slight pull of gravity as it climbed higher. He glanced out one of the narrow windows, watching as the desolate battlefield below grew smaller and smaller. The wreckage, the craters, the remnants of a long-forgotten war, they all faded into the distance. Leon leaned back in his seat, his mind racing. What did the Queen want from him? Why hadn't she simply ordered her soldiers to take the blade by force? Something about this situation didn't add up. He'd heard stories of Queen Saraia's ruthlessness, of her unrelenting pursuit of power. This sudden restraint didn't fit the picture. The blade seemed to hum softly, almost as if it was sensing his unease. Leon looked down at it, the glowing symbols running along its length. The weapon had chosen him, and for some reason, the Zerithians didn't seem to know why. If he could keep that advantage, if he could stay one step ahead, he might have a chance to get out of this alive. "Do you know what you're getting into, human?" one of the soldiers said suddenly, breaking the silence. The voice was female, calm but firm. Leon turned his head slightly. "You mean being dragged to a Zerithian flagship in the middle of nowhere?" "Not exactly my first choice." She smirked faintly. "That blade you're holding, if you think it's just a weapon, you're mistaken. It's a link to the Queen's bloodline, a symbol of her authority. The fact that you can hold it." She shook her head. "It shouldn't be possible." "Yeah, I've heard that before," Leon replied, his tone even. "But here I am, still holding it." She stared at him for a moment before looking away. "Just be careful. The Queen doesn't tolerate disobedience." Leon frowned. That didn't sound like a threat. If anything, it felt like a warning. But before he could ask more, the dropship began to slow. A voice over the intercom announced their approach to the flagship. The dropship's engines whined softly as it settled into the docking bay. The hatch opened again, revealing a cavernous interior lined with rows of maintenance equipment and Zerithian personnel. The soldiers filed out, motioning for Leon to follow. He stepped onto the cold metal floor, his boots making faint echoes as he moved. The flagship's sheer size was overwhelming. Every surface gleamed with polished metal, and the air was filled with a low hum of machinery. Zerithian crew members glanced at him as he passed, their eyes lingering on the blade. Some whispered quietly to each other, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Clearly, the sight of a human carrying their queen's sacred weapon was enough to stir unrest. Leon was escorted down a long corridor toward what he assumed was the main chamber. The soldiers walked on either side of him, their weapons lowered but ready. The tension in the air was palpable. He could feel their eyes on his back, feel their unease. When they finally reached the chamber doors, the lead soldier placed a hand on a panel, and the doors slid open with a soft whoosh. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit, with a long platform leading up to a raised throne. And there, sitting regally upon it, was Queen Saraia. Her presence was commanding. Her sharp, elegant armor reflected the faint light, and her glowing eyes locked onto Leon the moment he entered. The chamber fell silent. Every Zerithian in the room stood at attention, their expressions unreadable. Leon stepped forward, the blade still in his hand. Whatever came next, he knew he had to be ready. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about understanding why the blade had chosen him, and what it meant for both humans and Zerithians alike. As Leon stepped into the vast chamber, the weight of the blade in his hand felt heavier than ever. The queen's glowing eyes followed him, her expression unreadable. She sat motionless on her throne, her sharp armor gleaming faintly in the dim light. The room was eerily quiet except for the soft hum of energy that seemed to radiate from the walls themselves. The Zerithian soldiers stopped a few paces behind Leon, silently watching. None of them spoke, and the tension in the air was almost suffocating. Leon took a slow, steadying breath. He was out of his element here, surrounded by aliens who could crush him without much effort. But he wasn't about to show any fear. "You're the human who found the blade," Queen Saraia said at last, her voice cold and commanding. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, as if she already knew everything about him. Leon nodded slightly, his grip on the blade tightening. "I found it. It's mine now." A murmur spread through the gathered Zerithians, but the queen raised her hand, and the room fell silent again. "Yours? Do you understand what that blade represents?" she asked, rising slowly from her throne. Her movements were deliberate, almost regal, as she descended the steps toward him. "I know it's important to you," Leon replied, his tone even. "But I didn't steal it. It let me take it." Her eyes narrowed. "It let you," she repeated, as if testing the words. She stopped a few feet away, towering over him. Even though he was taller than most humans, she still had a commanding presence that made him feel small. "No human has ever wielded that blade. It is bound to my bloodline, to my family's legacy. You should not be able to hold it, let alone claim it as your own." "Yeah, well, here I am," Leon said, lifting the blade slightly. The glowing symbols pulsed faintly, casting a golden light across both of them. "I don't know why it works for me, but it does. Maybe your bloodline isn't as special as you thought." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the room. The soldiers tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons, but again, the queen motioned for them to stand down. Her gaze never left Leon, and he could see a flicker of something, confusion, maybe even doubt, behind her calm exterior. "Careful, human," she said, her voice lowering. "You may have the blade now, but you do not understand its power. It is not just a weapon. It is a key, a link to something far greater than you can imagine." Leon frowned, trying to make sense of her words. A key, a link. He thought back to the stories he'd heard about Zerithian relics, about their supposed connection to ancient sources of power. But none of that had mattered when he first picked up the blade. To him, it had just been another artifact, another prize to salvage. Now it seemed he was in the middle of something much larger than he had realized. "I didn't come here to fight you," Leon said finally. "I just want to understand why it chose me. If it's so tied to your bloodline, why would it respond to a human?" Queen Saraia studied him for a long moment. "Perhaps you are not as ordinary as you think," she said quietly. Then her expression hardened again. "But that does not mean you are worthy. The blade's true nature can only be unlocked by one who understands its purpose, its history." "Then tell me," Leon said, "what is its purpose?" The Queen's lips pressed into a thin line. "It is not something I can explain in words. The blade's purpose must be earned, through trial and sacrifice. And you, human, have not yet proven yourself." Leon's jaw tightened. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that?" She stepped back, motioning to her guards. "You will remain aboard this vessel. We shall see if you are truly worthy of wielding the blade. If you survive the trials, you may earn the right to learn the truth. If not, the blade will return to me, and you will face the consequences of your arrogance." Leon felt a knot form in his stomach. He wasn't thrilled about staying under Zerithian control, but he also didn't have much of a choice. The blade's glow dimmed slightly, as if sensing his hesitation. He looked down at it, then back at the Queen. "Fine," he said finally, "but don't think I'll make it easy for you." The Queen's lips curved into a faint smile, though it was more unsettling than reassuring. "Good. It is not supposed to be easy." As the guards led him away, Leon's mind raced. He didn't know what these trials would involve, but one thing was certain: he was in deeper than he'd ever intended. And now, with the blade in his hand, he had no choice but to see it through. Leon stood in the center of a dimly lit chamber, the blade glowing faintly in his grasp. The Queen's guards had escorted him here, and then they had left without a word, sealing the doors behind them. The silence was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's engines somewhere far below. The room itself was strange, its walls covered in ancient symbols that pulsed with a soft golden light, much like the markings on the blade. He tightened his grip on the weapon and scanned his surroundings. No one had told him what to expect, but he wasn't about to let his guard down. Every instinct in him screamed that this was a test, and not one he could afford to fail. The Queen had called them trials, and he knew enough about Zerithian culture to understand what that meant. They didn't hand out second chances. If he couldn't prove himself, he wouldn't just lose the blade. He'd lose everything. A low vibration ran through the floor, and Leon turned sharply. From the far side of the chamber, a panel slid open, revealing a tall, humanoid figure. It wasn't a Zerithian, at least not like the ones he'd encountered before. This being's form was sleek and fluid, its armor-like exterior shimmering with the same golden light as the walls. Its face was smooth and featureless, yet somehow it radiated an aura of calm menace. Leon took a cautious step back, holding the blade at the ready. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying him. Then it raised one arm, and a beam of golden energy shot toward him. Leon barely managed to dodge, throwing himself to the side. The beam struck the floor where he had been standing, leaving a scorched mark behind. "Okay, so we're doing this," he muttered, shifting into a defensive stance. The figure moved with incredible speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Leon swung the blade, and to his surprise, it moved almost on its own, guiding his strike. The edge connected with the figure's arm, cutting through the golden energy as if it were nothing more than mist. The figure staggered back, the severed arm dissolving into the air, but it didn't fall. Instead, the wound seemed to heal itself, the glowing particles reforming into a new limb. Leon gritted his teeth. Great. Self-healing. Just what I needed. The figure attacked again, faster this time, forcing Leon to rely entirely on the blade's movements. It felt strange, like the weapon was leading him rather than the other way around. Every parry, every strike, came almost instinctively, as if the blade knew what was coming before he did. He slashed again and again, and each time, the figure reformed. But Leon noticed something. Each time it repaired itself, it took a little longer. "You don't like that, do you?" he said, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. He pressed the attack, driving the figure back. The blade pulsed brighter with each strike, and the room itself seemed to respond, the walls glowing more intensely. The symbols on the walls began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns Leon couldn't decipher. Whatever this trial was, it wasn't just about combat. It was about the blade's connection to the room, to the energy around them. The figure finally stopped attacking, retreating a few steps as if acknowledging his progress. The glow of its armor dimmed, and it lowered its arms. Leon kept his guard up, not trusting the sudden shift. Then, without warning, the figure dissolved entirely, its form fading into golden mist that dispersed into the walls. The room grew silent again. Leon didn't lower the blade. "That's it. That's the big trial," he called out. His voice echoed in the chamber, but no answer came. The blade's glow faded slightly, settling into a steady, low light. Leon took a few deep breaths, his heart still pounding from the fight. Whatever had just happened, it felt like the first step. A warning, a message. This was only the beginning. He turned slowly, looking at the walls. The symbols had stopped shifting and now formed a clear pattern. In the center of the chamber, where the figure had appeared, a new doorway had opened. It led into darkness, the faint golden glow spilling out into the shadows beyond. Leon hesitated. He didn't know what was waiting for him on the other side, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stop now. If the blade had chosen him, if it truly saw something in him that even he didn't understand, then he had to see this through. He tightened his grip and stepped forward, ready for whatever came next. Leon stepped through the darkened doorway, the glow of the blade casting faint golden light onto the walls around him. The air grew colder, heavier, as if the room itself was alive and watching. His steps echoed on the smooth metal floor as he moved forward, his senses on high alert. Whatever the trials had been so far, this one felt different, more intense, more dangerous. The corridor curved slightly, leading into a vast circular chamber. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings that shimmered faintly as Leon approached, as if reacting to his presence. At the center of the room was a raised platform with a pedestal. On the pedestal sat a small, orb-like object that pulsed with a dull blue light. It seemed harmless, but Leon had learned by now not to trust appearances. He approached cautiously, his grip on the blade firm. Each step felt heavier, as if the air itself was pushing back against him. When he reached the platform, the orb flared brighter, and a deep hum filled the chamber. Leon paused, scanning his surroundings. Nothing seemed to move, but the sense of being watched grew stronger. "Okay," he muttered under his breath. "What's the trick this time?" As if in response, the carvings on the walls began to glow more intensely. The patterns shifted, twisting and spiraling outward. The floor beneath Leon's feet trembled, and suddenly, the carvings detached from the walls. They formed into floating, shimmering constructs, shields, blades, and shapes that looked like glowing armor. They hovered in the air, surrounding him, and then began to move. Leon ducked as a glowing shield flew toward him, narrowly missing his head. He swung the blade reflexively, and the energy construct shattered on impact, dissolving into sparks. Another construct lunged at him, a spear of light aimed directly at his chest. He sidestepped and countered, the blade slicing through it as if it were paper. The constructs kept coming. Each one moved with speed and precision, forcing Leon to stay on the defensive. The blade hummed in his hands, guiding his movements. It was the only reason he was still standing. Every time he cut through a construct, another took its place, the chamber filling with swirling light and constant motion. Leon realized that brute force wasn't going to win this fight. The constructs weren't just attacking. They were testing him, pushing him to his limits. He had to think, to adapt. As another shield lunged at him, he raised the blade at an angle, deflecting the attack and redirecting it into another construct. The resulting collision caused both to disintegrate. He spun, using the blade's movements to block and counter, focusing on staying one step ahead. Slowly, the glowing shapes began to falter. The carvings on the walls dimmed, and the constructs became less aggressive. It was as if the room itself was acknowledging his effort. Finally, the last construct dissolved, leaving the chamber silent once more. Leon stood there, breathing heavily, the blade still glowing faintly in his hand. He glanced at the pedestal, where the orb continued to pulse softly. It hadn't changed, but the air around it felt different, calmer. Cautiously, Leon approached the pedestal. The blade's light reflected off the orb's surface, and for a moment, he thought he saw something within it. Images, maybe memories, flickering just below the surface. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the orb. The moment he made contact, the room filled with light. A voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber. It wasn't Zerithian, nor was it in any language Leon had ever heard before. Yet he understood it, as if the meaning was being placed directly into his mind. Proven, worthy of truth. The orb's light enveloped Leon, and he felt a surge of energy run through him. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming. He closed his eyes, gripping the blade tightly as the voice continued. The blade's power is not in its strength, but in its purpose. It is a bridge between the past and the future, a bond that transcends bloodlines. By your hand, its story continues. The light began to fade, and Leon opened his eyes. The orb had gone dark, its purpose fulfilled. The carvings on the walls dimmed, leaving the room still and quiet. He looked at the blade, its glow steady and calm, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Leon took a deep breath, letting the weight of the words settle. He didn't fully understand what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. The trials were more than a test of his strength. They were a revelation of the blade's true purpose, and perhaps his own.